Today we'll be talking about Cantonese。咁我想喺今日呢條影片裏邊咧，咁同大家講一講廣東話嘅。咁關於我自己先啦，咁我本身廣東話係算係我嘅母語之一啦。咁同屋企人啊，同好多朋友都係用廣東話溝通嘅。自己本身就好耐冇講廣東話啦，因為我喺外國住咗好耐啦，咁所以廣東話有少少生疏，但係基本上溝通係冇問題。咁想喺今日呢條影片裏邊咧，同大家講一講廣東話同埋研究一下廣東話嘅用處嘅。So what is Cantonese? So Cantonese is the official language of quite a few regions in and out of China. So Hong Kong, Macau, Guangdong Province, Guangxi Province in mainland China, they all use Cantonese, and also is widely spoken outside of China as well. For example, in Southeast Asia, like Malaysia, Singapore, and basically Chinese communities throughout the Western world, a lot of them speak Cantonese. Especially in Canada where I used to live, there are a lot of Hong Kong immigrants, and in Chinatown, or just basically in school, their family background is from Hong Kong, so they use Cantonese to communicate with each other. It's still a very popular language among Canto immigrants. Also, Cantonese is one of the oldest forms of Chinese, and is believed to have originated from around 220 AD, whereas Mandarin was only documented first time in the 14th century. During the Yuan dynasty, Mandarin has become the regional language of China during the 1912, and the Communist Party popularized the use of Mandarin during 1949 so that everyone in China could be unified and they speak the same language. But because of the popular culture of movies, Canton pop from Hong Kong, particularly during the 80s and the 90s, Cantonese is still very popular among Chinese speakers in and outside of China. Difference between Mandarin and Cantonese. Cantonese has very different linguistic features than Mandarin. The two languages are very similar in some ways, but they can also be very different in a lot of ways. So in general, when a Mandarin speaker is speaking with a Cantonese speaker and they speak their language respectively, they usually would not be able to understand each other. They are as different as Portuguese to Spanish or Catalan to Spanish. It could be even more different. So the official explanation of differences between Mandarin and Cantonese, they are different dialects, but purely from a linguistic features perspective, they are very different languages. So Mandarin, as I mentioned, is the official language of mainland China and is also used in Taiwan. So if you watch a Chinese channel, it's very likely that you'll be hearing Mandarin instead of Cantonese. And the number of people speaking Mandarin versus Cantonese would be Cantonese 85.5 million, Mandarin 900 million. There are a lot of differences in terms of vocabularies, words, and there are some significant differences in terms of grammar as well. For example, in Mandarin, if you want to say let's eat first, we will say 我们先吃饭. So 先 is the adverb and it's usually put before the verb. But in Cantonese, we'll say 我哋食飯先. So 先 is the adverb and it's usually put behind the verb. Besides the grammar, written Chinese can be very different between Cantonese and Mandarin, and particularly traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. Traditional characters are used in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, and simplified Chinese is usually used in mainland China, Malaysia, Singapore, and some Western Chinese community. Traditional Chinese system reserves the complex forms of Chinese characters. For example, here's a list of the same Chinese characters in traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. While some people argue that the simplified characters are easier to learn, I actually do appreciate the traditional Chinese because of how beautiful the Chinese characters are. And particularly if you like calligraphy, a lot of the calligraphy art you see in museums, they're written in traditional characters as well. Besides the writing system, tone is very different between Cantonese and Mandarin, and perhaps is going to blow your mind because for Chinese learners, 4 tones is already a lot to learn and distinguish, but Cantonese has 9 tones. And particularly in Cantonese, if your tone is not correct, you usually end up saying something completely different. And you usually end up saying something very dirty as well. For example, here's a table to demonstrate all 9 tones in Cantonese. So using C as an example, the 9 tones will be pronounced like C, 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 C. Eh? C, 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 6, 6. To be honest, for a Cantonese non-native speaker, it's just really hard to tell the tones apart. Most of the people who speak Cantonese either are their parents speak Cantonese and they learn Cantonese from their parents, or they learn it from their friends when they're very young, so they're able to tell the difference. So as an adult learner learning Cantonese, the tones will really be something that you really have to practice a lot. So you really have to put in the effort in getting the tones right. You have to say C, 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 C every single day to make sure that you got the right tones. Whereas in Mandarin, there's only 4 tones. For example, using ma, the 4 tones will be pronounced like ma, 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 ma. However, in some cases, even if you don't get the tones right because of the context, people will still be able to tell what you're saying. For example, passport is 物资 and pepper is 物资. Obviously, they're so different in terms of nature of the vocabulary, so people will be able to tell these two words apart depending on your context. By the same token, some words have the exact same pronunciation and same tones. For example, 水瓶 is standard, but it also can be 水瓶, which is water bottle. And from the context of the sentence, you'll be able to tell which one is which, and you can tell them apart. Transliteration system. In Mandarin, there are two major transliteration systems. One is called pinyin, which is the most common one that most people use when they learn Chinese, and the other one is called 注音. So pinyin is usually used in mainland China, and 注音 is usually used in Taiwan, and they look something like this. In Cantonese, however, there are various systems that are used, but the most common ones are Yuping and Yale system. Yuping is usually used in the learning materials for Cantonese, and Yale system is basically using the English alphabet, so it might be a little bit more acceptable for Western learners. And they look something like this. And for the numbers that are here, they are actually the ones that indicate which sound it is. For example, hung is the first tone and gong is the second tone. So Hong Kong is Hong Kong. They indicate the tones of the sentence. If you're learning Cantonese, I'll definitely recommend you to use Yuping because it's just in general easier for you to take reference to which tone it is. Spoken and written Chinese. In spoken Chinese, especially in casual conversations, there's a lot of colloquialism and also slangs that people use on a day-to-day basis, but most of the time they would not write it. When people are writing in Chinese, they tend to be a lot more formal and they follow a much more structured system. Cantonese particularly is a very distinctive example. So Hong Kong, where Cantonese is most widely spoken, was a former colony of the UK. So a lot of words that are used in Cantonese, they're borrowed from English words. For example, bus in the written Chinese system is 公车 or Mandarin 公车, but in Hong Kong, or most of the people that speak Cantonese, they will use 巴士, which is the translation from English, bus. Another example is ball. In Cantonese is ball, and in the written form of Cantonese or Chinese is 球 or 考 in Cantonese. So the spoken word for ball is directly taken from English or borrowed from English. Particularly, written Cantonese is seen as inferior to write. In colloquial Cantonese, we say here as 累斗. But in written Cantonese or written form of Chinese, we say 结语, or in Mandarin 这儿. And another example, why in Cantonese is 点解, but in written form is 为什么 or 为什么 in Mandarin. So as you can see, when Cantonese speakers are writing, they use a more formal, more structured way as Mandarin speakers. So written form of Cantonese and Mandarin, they are pretty much the same, but when they're spoken, they're very different in Mandarin. Because of how colloquial Cantonese is, people generally do not write in Cantonese as they speak. They write more formal Chinese, and most of the people in Hong Kong, for example, they will learn in school how to write proper Chinese, and when they're speaking, they just speak their normal colloquial form of Cantonese to each other. However, one thing to note in here is that in recent years, Cantonese speakers are more proud of their learning, so they like to write in Cantonese as well. So in forums, and particularly something that you read online, they are written in Cantonese in the colloquial form, and in that case, Mandarin speakers will not be able to comprehend even in the written form of Cantonese. So some advice of learning Cantonese. My first advice here is really to get your tones right. And by saying that, I mean you have to listen very, very carefully every time you hear a Cantonese word and really look up their tones in a dictionary so you get the tones exactly right. Because like I said before, if you don't get the tones right, you usually end up saying something completely different and you will build a very bad habit as you continue learning the language. And second, immersion. I have mentioned that in another video that I made earlier about immersion. The best way to learn language is not to learn it from textbook. The best way to learn it is through immersing yourself in that particular language. While learning, for example, like Japanese or Mandarin, there's just so much more learning materials online. Cantonese, apparently a lot less, but there's still a lot of movies, like Cantonese songs that you can listen to immerse yourself in there. What I would do is that if I watch something in Cantonese, probably something on TVB, which is a very popular TV channel, a lot of us Canto speakers will watch, I would just listen to them them and then pause it and repeat after them, and then do it a few times, even with the same sentence, until you're comfortable with it before you move on. And I think that immersing yourself, particularly in a language that is very tonal, immersion is definitely the most effective way to learn. And another question is, should you learn Cantonese or not? And the answer really depends on your situation and where you live and work, plus your personal interest. I know a lot of people learn Cantonese as an adult because their partner is from Hong Kong or they speak Cantonese, they want to get a little bit closer to them or their family, which is a very valid reason, or they are living in Hong Kong, they want to make local friends. Particularly if you're interested in living in Hong Kong or Macau, learning Cantonese is definitely very helpful because that helps you to navigate and also understand the culture a lot more, because primarily people speak Cantonese there, they don't really speak Mandarin, communicating with each other. So learning Cantonese is a very smart idea. But if you're interested in mainland China or Taiwan, you want to learn Mandarin because primarily they speak Mandarin there. And if you want to learn both of the languages, focus on one first. Make sure that you're able to communicate in one first, and then it's going to help you a lot more to learn the other one. But really don't try to learn it at the same time because of how different the tones are and also how different people communicate. It can really mess up with your brain. In Hong Kong or even in Macau, if you speak English and Mandarin, very likely that you're going to be able to get a job, and being able to speak Cantonese doesn't really add up to any value because most of the business is done in either English or Mandarin in these two places. Being able to speak Cantonese is really just being able to bond with the people around you, your colleagues or your friends. So financially speaking, being able to speak Cantonese doesn't really bring any value. And no matter what, Mandarin is increasingly more popular among even people in Hong Kong or overseas, and Cantonese is declining globally because there are less and less people speaking the language. Having said that, I still think that Cantonese is a very beautiful language. It has a lot of local culture in Hong Kong that is integrated in the language, in the slangs, in the way that they communicate with each other, and even curse words. I think Cantonese curse words are the dirtiest curse words in the world. If you're interested in learning Cantonese, why not learning a few phrases, watching a few shows to see if that's something that you like to do. So this is the end of today's video, and let me know if there's any questions, and also would you be learning Cantonese or do you speak Cantonese? Let me know in the comment below, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you and bye bye.